The 1991 Celtics-Pacers playoff series isn't just some forgotten first-round matchup. It is basketball theater at its finest. You got Larry Bird, year 12, bad back and all, facing off against this Indiana sharpshooter Chuck Person who literally told reporters, "The Rifleman is hunting for birds." What happened next is the stuff of NBA legend. Bird pointing to spots on the floor before draining jumpers in Person's face, the Rifleman refusing to back down, somehow stealing Game 2 in the Boston Garden. Bird lying on the sidelines between plays because his back was so destroyed, then somehow dropping 32 in the decisive Game 5. This wasn't just basketball, this was personal. No super teams, no friendly hugs after games, just pure, unfiltered hatred between two guys who couldn't stand each other. The perfect example of why we fell in love with this game in the first place. This is the story of 5 games that captured everything that made Bird a legend, and why 30 plus years later, we are still talking about when the Rifleman hunted for birds and found out why you don't mess with Larry Legend. The NBA playoffs are about to start April 1991, and Celtics are gearing up to face the Indiana Pacers in round 1. On paper, this shouldn't even be a series. The Celtics are 2-seed, 56 wins, with the original Big Three still intact: Bird, McHale, and Parrish. 3 guys who will end up in Springfield. 3 guys with multiple championship rings. 3 guys who'd seen everything the NBA could throw at them. The Pacers? Come on. 7 seed. Exactly .500 basketball, 41-41. They would literally never won a playoff series since joining the NBA. Not one. They had some nice young pieces. Reggie wasn't Reggie yet. Shrimp hadn't fully developed. But this was still a franchise trying to figure out who they were. Here's the thing nobody was talking about enough. Larry's back was completely shot. I mean destroyed. He is 34 years old, which in 1991 NBA years is like being 47 today. He'd missed 5 of the last 8 regular season games, couldn't even practice. Newspapers were writing how he'd show up, take a few jumpers alone, and then disappear back into the training room. Their coach, Chris Ford, who was no dummy, basically tells reporters, "If Bird can just play in the games, I'll take it." That is how bad it was. And the dirty little secret, the Celtics were 0-5 all time in playoff games without Bird. 0-5. And waiting in the wings is Chuck Person, the Rifleman, who might be the most underrated trash talker of that entire era. He sees a wounded legend and decides, "This is my moment." Nobody knew it yet, but we were about to witness one of the greatest individual feuds in playoff history. If you don't know Chuck Person, here's what you need to know. His parents literally named him Chuck Connors Person after the guy from the TV show The Rifleman. I'm not making this up. His actual birth certificate. Because that is exactly what the Rifleman was. A pure gunner with absolutely zero conscience. This guy would pull up from anywhere, anytime against anyone. But what made Person special wasn't just the shooting, it was the talking. Constant, relentless trash talk. Like if Reggie Miller and Gary Payton had a baby who was raised by Kevin Garnett. That level of trash talk. And here's the amazing part. He backed it up just enough to be dangerous, not consistently, but enough that you couldn't ignore him. Look, the NBA in the early 90s was still a gunfighters league. You had your established sharpshooters, and then you had the guy, Larry Legend, the basketball equivalent of Doc Holliday. 3 rings, 3 MVPs, the greatest shooter any of us had ever seen, the best passing big, the most clutch player on the planet. And Chuck Person looks at all and basically says, "Yeah, I want that smoke." Who does that? It is like challenging Michael Jordan to a dunk contest or talking trash to Mike Tyson before a fight. You just don't do it unless you're built differently, and Person absolutely was. The entire building, had this weird vibe before tip-off. Nobody knew if Bird could even play. Newspapers that morning basically ran a "Willie or Wonnie" headline. Bird himself later admitted, "I didn't know what to expect because I've never missed that much coming into a playoff situation." But here's the thing about Larry Bird that young basketball fans today just don't understand. The worse he felt physically, the more likely he was to do something incredible. It is like his body and his basketball brain had an inverse relationship. So Bird takes the floor, and you know what happens next? One of those moments that makes you believe in basketball gods. The guy couldn't even practice, shoots a brutal 6 for 20, and somehow puts up a triple-double, 21 and 12 and 12 in 41 minutes on a back that doctors were about to put in traction. In the fourth quarter, game tied at 1:10, Larry orchestrates this 10-0 run that just breaks Indiana's spirit. 4 points, 3 assists, even gets a steal. Classic Bird sequence where he's 3 steps ahead of everyone else on the court. Celtics win 127-120. Fans are celebrating, right? No. While 15,000 fans are filling out the garden, Larry Bird is literally being transported to New England Baptist Hospital to have his back to put in traction. Who does that? What human being plays 41 minutes of playoff basketball and then needs his spine stretched out immediately afterward? Only Bird. The Celtics' official statement was basically he might be released from the hospital tomorrow morning. Not exactly reassuring. Meanwhile, Chuck Person puts up 21 points in the loss. Good numbers, but this was still Bird's show. Little did we know, the Rifleman was just loading up his ammunition. First off, the fact that Bird is even playing is ridiculous. The man was literally in traction less than 48 hours ago. This is back when athletes actually played through injuries instead of sitting out with load management or whatever we call it now. But something is different. You could feel it right from the opening tip. There's this weird energy in the building. And the Rifleman, he starts hitting everything. By halftime, Person is already dropped 23 points and looked like he's not gonna miss today. What happens next is one of those performances that could go viral today. Person enters this Matrix-level shooting zone that even Steph Curry will be jealous of. At one point, he makes 9 consecutive shots. 9 from everywhere. Corner threes, top of the key, falling away with defenders draped all over him, didn't matter. Everything is dropping. Person finishes with 39 points on 15 of 24 shooting with a playoff record 7 3-pointers. 7 threes in 1991. That is like hitting 12 today. And with each shot, he gets louder and bolder. He's talking trash to Celtics bench, to the crowd, pointing at Bird. It was basketball blasphemy happening right in front of 15,000 horrified Celtics fans. Meanwhile, Bird's clearly laboring. You can see it in his gait, how he's not bending to get into his shooting motion. Still puts up 18 and 10 because he's Larry Bird, but it's not enough. Not on this day. Pacers win 130-118, stealing home court. The series is tied 1-1, and suddenly every Celtics fan is having flashbacks to 1983 when they upset by the Bucks in the second round. After the game, Person gives this quote that perfectly encapsulates the early 90s NBA ego. Nation, that favorite nation is me. Who says that? What does that even mean? It is like when Kanye started calling himself Jesus, except Person did it 20 years earlier. The real story though wasn't just that the Pacers won, it was how they won. They punched the Celtics in the mouth in their own building, and Person wasn't just scoring, He was coming directly at Larry Bird in the Boston Garden. Little did Chuck know he'd just awakened a sleeping giant with a bad back. Let me set the scene. The Celtics had just been embarrassed at home. They lost home court advantage. Bird was moving like a 60-year-old man after a long day of yard work, and Chuck Person, he's basically Muhammad Ali at this point. McHale, who never gets enough credit for being one of the greatest coaches in NBA history, summed it up perfectly before the game. I was kind of wondering where that team was, but you saw it come out of wrapper. Classic McHale, dry, sarcastic, and 100% accurate. Here's where the old school Celtics basketball kicked in. The stuff that today's analytics guys will never understand. Boston had a simple game plan. Absolutely destroy Chuck Person. Not just guard him, punish him. Every screen, every cut, every possession. It was basketball's version of a hockey team putting a goon on the ice to handle a problem. From the opening tip, the Celtics are bodying him up, fighting through the scenes like their contracts depended on it, contesting everything. This wasn't just good defense, this was personal. This was the basketball equivalent of that scene in Godfellas where they stomping the guy in the restaurant kitchen. The results? Person misses his first 6 shots, doesn't hit a field goal until the garbage time, finishes with just 6 points on 2 for 8 shooting. The Rifleman got disarmed. Meanwhile, Boston's offense is humming. McHale goes for 22 with those unstoppable low post moves that today's big men should study instead of practicing threes. Parrish adds 19, Bird chips in 16, which doesn't sound like much, but it is the exact amount of the team needed. Celtics win 112-105, home court advantage reclaimed, series lead 2-1, message delivered. After the game, Person tries to save the face. They've played one heck of a defensive game. They shut me down. Yeah, no kidding. That was the entire game plan. But here's the part nobody was really talking about. While we are all focused on Bird-Person feud, there's that skinny kid named Reggie Miller starting to make some noise. At the time, he was still just Cheryl Miller's brother to most fans, but if you were paying attention, you could see something brewing there. None of us knew it yet, but we were witnessing the birth of the guy who would torment the Knicks for the next decade. Thankfully, that wasn't Celtics' problem. They had enough to deal with just shutting up the Rifleman. The Celtics had the perfect situation lined up. Win this game, go home, rest Birds back for a week, and prepare for the next round. It was right there. For 3 quarters, it is all going according to plan. Boston builds a 13-point lead in the third quarter with 8:22 left in the fourth, where they are still up by 9. They think they got this. And then the Rifleman reloads. Not quite the Game 2 performance where he became the prime Kobe Bryant for a night, but close enough to destroy Celtics Nation collective soul. There is this brutal 2-time stretch where Person hits 5 consecutive shots. 5, including 2 back-breaking threes that were basically from the parking lot. And with each one, Market Square Arena, which had the atmosphere of a library for most of Indiana's NBA existence, suddenly turns into a Cameroon indoor stadium during a Duke, North Carolina game. It is so loud that Brian Shaw literally cannot hear the play calls, resulting in a shot clock violation during the most critical part of the game. That never happens to a veteran team like Celtics. Person later said, "It felt like 17,000 people were lifting me up when I was taking those threes." And you know what? For Celtics, who was on the receiving end of that barrage, they felt that way watching it too. When the dust settles, Person's got 30, Reggie adds 27 again. Reggie is just getting started on his willing origin story, and the Pacers steal a 116-113 win. After the game, Person goes full resting hill, When Larry and Kevin are on me, it is like target practice. It is like I'm shooting by myself, and now I'm gonna go up to Boston and tear up the parquet. Tear up the parquet? That is like threatening to graffiti the Sistine Chapel or use the Declaration of Independence as a napkin. You just don't say that about Boston Garden floor. Series tied at 2. Game 5 back in Boston. Winner take all. Birds back getting worse by the minute. The Rifleman locked and loaded. If this happened today, NBA Twitter would have spontaneously combusted. Let me set the scene. The garden is packed. Every seat filled. Standing room only. That weird mix of cigar smoke and beer that defined the old garden. Everything is on the line. For the first half, it is what boxing people call a phone booth fight. Back and forth, punch for counterpunch. Celtics up, nobody can breathe easy, and the moment happens. The moment that belongs in the Basketball Hall of Fame alongside Jordan's flu game and Magic's rookie finals. Bird goes flying face first onto the parquet trying to block a shot, just slams into the floor. The entire garden goes completely silent. I'm talking funeral silent. Bird is lying there motionless, and for a second you think, is this how it ends? Is this how Larry Legend's career concludes? They finally help him off the court, and the diagnosis comes back. Bruised right cheekbone with nerve damage. Nerve damage in his face. Bird misses the rest of the half and the start of the third quarter. But here's where championship DNA kicks in. The Celtics, minus their heart and soul, somehow rally. Parrish starts dominating inside. Derek Smith, who people forget was a key defensive piece of that bench, comes in and just erases Chuck Person. But these Pacers weren't going away. Miller and Person start hitting everything. The garden is stunned. At that time, everyone in the crowd thought that it might snap. And then the moment. Larry Legend checks back in with 6:34 left in the third. His face is literally swollen on the right side. He looks like he just went 12 rounds with Mike Tyson. The garden explodes. I'm talking Beatles in the stadium level noise. Reggie Lewis, who would tragically leave us just 2 years later, said afterward, when he came back and did what he did, it just got me going. That was Larry's superpower, making everyone around him better through sheer force of will. What did Bird do? Only scored 32 points on 12 of 19 shooting, including 9 of 10 free throws in the fourth quarter with nerve damage in his face. Game tied, Bird hits this beautiful mid-range jumper that barely moves the net, and with the game on the line, he calmly knocks down 2 free throws to put Boston up. Pacers need a 3. Person gets a clean look, the exact shot he'd been making all this series. The shot is in the air, and for a split second, 15,000 hearts stop simultaneously. Clank, rim out. Celtics win 124-121. Series over. The guy who had been in traction 5 days earlier is now standing at center court, face swollen, back destroyed, receiving a 2-minute standing ovation from the Garden faithful. Person finishes with 13 points on 4 of 12 shooting. The Rifleman's bullets had finally run out. You want to know why people worshipped Larry Bird? That is why. Because when everything was on the line, physically broken, older against a younger trash talker coming for his crown, he delivered. That is the difference between being great and being a legend. So the Pacers fly home. Season over, but future unquestionably bright. Chuck Person had officially put himself on the NBA map, not just as an elite trash talker, but as a legitimate scoring threat who could go nuclear in big moments. And Reggie Miller, he was still in the larval stage of that, what would become the Nick Keller we all know and love, or hate if you are Spike Lee. For the Celtics, it was what I call A last hurrah series. You know, when aging a contender empties the tank to survive, knowing deep down they're probably spent their last bullets. They went on to lose the Pistols in the next round, and 6 games just didn't have enough left after the Indiana War. Bird's back was basically disintegrating at this point. He'd play one more year, including that iconic Dream Team run where he barely practiced but still dropped dimes like a vending machine, before walking away in '92. The saddest part, we didn't know it at that time, but we were watching the last truly great series of Larry Bird's career, the final flourish of basketball genius before his body finally said, "That's enough." As for Chuck Person, he never quite reached those heights again. Got traded to Minnesota in '93, become an NBA nomad. The basketball gods have a way of punishing those who dare to challenge Mount Olympus. Years later, when someone asked Bird about Person, he delivered this absolute gem. "Chuck works for me. He mows my yard. I see him every day. Classic Bird." Then he added, "If it wasn't for Chuck, I'd be averaging about 12 points a game in my career." Coming from Larry Legend, that is like getting knighted. This series never gets the proper recognition in the NBA lore. It should be right up there with Jordan versus the Bad Boys, Lakers Celtics, and all the iconic playoff matchups. It had everything: trash talk, clutch performances, injuries, comebacks, and the most importantly, one last glimpse of Larry Bird showing us why he was Larry Bird. What the Rifleman didn't understand when he started hunting for birds was that legends don't get down easy. They rise to the occasion. They look pain in the face and say, "Not today." And that is what made Bird different from almost everyone who's ever played the game. When his body was broken, when the odds were stacked against him, when someone young gunslinger came for his throne, that is when he was at his most dangerous. So yeah, Chuck Person challenged the legend, and for a brief, shining moment, he almost pulled it off. But legends are legends for a reason. Here's the thing about basketball that the analytics guys will never fully capture with their spreadsheets and efficiency ratings. Sometimes the most unforgettable moments happen when nobody's looking. Not in Game 7 of the finals, but in some random first-round series that CBS barely wanted to broadcast. On paper, the 56-win Celtics were supposed to steamroll the 500 Pacers. Vegas had them as massive favorites. Instead, we got 5 games of basketball theater that wouldn't just captivate the moment. It would foreshadow the next decade of Eastern Conference basketball. That last stamp of Larry Bird, the bird of the Indiana Pacers as a legitimate franchise. The Rifleman becoming basketball's ultimate villain for a one glorious week. Larry's legacy versus Chuck's audacity. The established order versus the upstart challenger, the kind of series that's almost better in memory than it was in real time because now we understand what we were actually watching.